They laughed at me when I had nothing. I stayed quiet and kept pushing forward. I didn't forget how they treated me. Now they pretend they always supported me. The hum of the Sub-Zero refrigerator, a soft, almost imperceptible thrum against the backdrop of an otherwise impossibly quiet house, was the loudest thing in the room. It was the sound of success, I suppose, measured in decibels and stainless steel. The morning light, filtered through custom blinds, laid perfect, parallel lines across the polished concrete floor of my kitchen. Expensive, austere, precisely what I'd always wanted, and precisely what they couldn't stand. My coffee, a single-origin Rwandan blend, steamed gently in a hand-thrown ceramic mug, the kind that cost more than their weekly grocery bill. Tone cue, bitter laugh. They called me a snob now. Funny, isn't it? For years, they called me a failure. A dreamer. A lost cause. Now, they call me a snob, but it's always just a preamble to asking for something, usually money, always with that sickly sweet, manufactured concern dripping from their words. We always believed in you, you know. We just wanted you to be realistic. Realistic. That was their word for stay small, stay silent, stay out of our way. I know what you're thinking, why even bother with them? And you're right, in a way. But you don't understand the kind of slow, insidious poison that drips into your soul when you're constantly told you're less, that your ambitions are foolish, that your very existence is an inconvenience. It's a death by 1,000 paper cuts, and each one leaves a scar. And then, when you finally cauterize the wounds and build something for yourself, they reappear, expecting to share the harvest they never sowed. This isn't about money, not really. It's about the truth. It's about a decades-long historical resentment that finally boiled over, fueled by their relentless gaslighting. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. The smell of that coffee, oddly enough, always brings me back to the instant kind I used to nurse in a cramped, mold-tinged studio apartment, back when the only hum was the broken refrigerator fighting a losing battle with entropy. They laughed at me then. My older brother, Mark, with his carefully cultivated air of benevolent superiority, and my sister, Clara, whose smile was always a little too wide, a little too saccharine when she was delivering a backhanded compliment. "You're still doing that thing?" Mark had asked once during a rare, obligatory family dinner I'd been guilt-tripped into attending. This was probably 10 years ago, maybe more. The heavy, greasy scent of my mother's pot roast, the one comfort food I still harbored a strange affection for, hung thick in the air, mingling with the clinking of cutlery and the low murmur of comfortable, unchallenging conversation that always seemed to exclude me. "It's not a thing, Mark," I'd said, trying to keep my voice even, trying to project an air of quiet determination despite the familiar knot tightening in my stomach. "It's a platform. For independent artists. We're building out the infrastructure for decentralized content distribution." The words felt heavy and academic even to my own ears, knowing full well they wouldn't register with him. He was a banker, a man of concrete numbers and easily digestible returns. My world was abstract, future-facing, and at that point, entirely unprofitable. He'd taken a long, slow sip of his generic mass-produced lager, the condensation on the glass leaving a perfect ring on my mother's meticulously polished antique dining table. Decentralized. Right. So, like, a website, he'd asked, his tone dripping with mock seriousness, a barely disguised smirk playing on his lips. My father had chuckled from the head of the table, a low, rumbling sound of approval for Mark's wit. My mother, bless her, had just offered me more potatoes, a silent plea for peace. "It's more complex than that, Mark. It's about empowering creators, cutting out the middlemen, fair compensation." I was trying, I really was. But my voice felt thin, reedy, lost in the echo chamber of their assured self-importance. Clara, who had been silently dissecting a piece of carrot on her plate, piped up, her voice a little too bright. "Oh, like when you tried to sell those handmade knitted hats in high school. Remember, Mom? The ones with the mismatched colors? No one bought them, did they?" She giggled, a tinkling, brittle sound that grated on my nerves. My face flushed, not just from anger, but from the raw sting of that old memory. The golden child dynamic was always in full swing whenever we were together. Mark and Clara, effortlessly successful in their parents' eyes, never challenged, always praised. I was the anomaly, the one who dreamt too big, the one who never quite fit into their neat, conventional world. My parents, who saw themselves as practical people, fed this dynamic, inadvertently turning Mark and Clara into extensions of their own limited worldview, and me into the perpetual black sheep. They didn't see it as belittling, they saw it as keeping me grounded. Tone cue. Sigh. Actually, Clara, I sold quite a few of those hats to students outside of our bubble, I retorted, my voice sharper than I intended. They appreciated the originality. Mark just shook his head, a pitying look on his face. Look, I'm just saying, it's good to have passions, but at some point, you need to consider a real career. Something stable. You're almost 30. Are you ever going to settle down? Buy a house? Get a proper job? The words were a hammer blow, each one echoing the subtle, insidious parental pressure that had followed me since I was a teenager. The expectation to conform, to be normal, to provide them with the easy narrative of a successful, conventional child, just like Mark and Clara. My pursuit of something different, something mine, was a direct challenge to their neatly constructed reality. It became a source of narcissistic supply for them to constantly remind me of my failure to meet their expectations. I have a proper job, Mark, I'd said, pushing away my plate, the pot roast suddenly unappetizing. And I am building something stable. It just doesn't fit into your little box of what stable looks like. He'd just shrugged, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. Whatever you say, kiddo. Just don't come crying to us when it all falls apart again. That was the night I decided I wouldn't just build my empire, I would build it in silence. And I would remember every single laugh, every sneer, every patronizing word. The scent of that pot roast, meant to be comforting, now just brought back a wave of nausea. Tone cue. Steely determination, and it did fall apart, several times. My first startup crashed and burned, taking my entire life savings and then some with it. I ended up in that cheap hotel, the one with the flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom and the pervasive smell of disinfectant trying, and failing, to mask years of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. I was living on instant noodles, the cheap kind ramen with just the seasoning packet and maybe, if I was lucky, a leftover packet of soy sauce from a takeout meal I'd treated myself to weeks ago. The thin, scratchy blankets, the hum of the ancient air conditioner rattling in the window, the distant wail of sirens, that was my world. I called home, swallowed my pride, and tried to explain I needed help just to cover rent for a month while I regrouped. We can't just keep bailing you out, my father had said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. You need to learn responsibility. Mark's doing so well, you should talk to him. He could probably get you an entry-level position at his bank. Something to get you on your feet. But I don't want to work at a bank, I'd pleaded, the desperation a raw knot in my throat. I have an idea, a new angle, I just need a little breathing room. An idea, my mother had chimed in, her tone weary. You've always had ideas, darling. But ideas don't pay the bills. When are you going to stop with all these risky ventures? It's not fair to us, constantly worrying. The phrase, it's not fair to us, became a mantra. The sunk cost fallacy was hitting me hard. I'd invested so much emotional energy into maintaining a relationship with them, despite the constant invalidation. I kept hoping they'd see my worth, hoping they'd support my vision, but every interaction reinforced the old patterns. I hung up, the receiver heavy and cold against my ear. That was the last time I asked them for anything. That was the moment the switch flipped. I stopped expecting love, stopped expecting support. I replaced the longing with a cold, hard resolve. I would make it. Not for them, but despite them. I spent the next 5 years eating, sleeping, and breathing code. I coded until my eyes burned, until my fingers ached. I learned to distinguish the subtle nuances in a single line of script, to appreciate the elegant brutality of an efficient algorithm. I built a network, meticulously, quietly, connecting with people who saw the potential, who understood the vision. Slowly, glacially, it started to work. Small investments, then larger ones. Strategic partnerships. And then, the explosion. A market shift, a perfectly timed release, and my platform became indispensable. Overnight, it seemed I was no longer the struggling dreamer. I was a disruptor. A success. That's when they came back. It started subtly. Clara liking all my old social media posts she'd actively ignored for years. Mark sending an email, congratulating me on the buzz around my company, suggesting we catch up sometime. And then came the phone calls. The requests. The big one came from Mark, of course. He'd left his banking job, decided to follow his passion, a vague venture into luxury lifestyle consultation, which mostly involved trying to sell overpriced junk to gullible socialites. He called me late one Tuesday, the familiar ringtone a jarring intrusion into my quiet evening. The hum of my new, high-tech air purifier was battling the scent of a beeswax candle, a stark contrast to the smells of my past. "Hey, little bro," he boomed, his voice artificially jovial. "Heard you're really crushing it. So proud of you, honestly. Always knew you had it in you. Remember how I used to tell you to just keep pushing forward?" Tone cue, inner turmoil, barely concealed rage, my grip tightened on the phone. Remember how I used to tell you to just keep pushing forward? The audacity. The sheer, unadulterated gall. My blood ran cold, then hot. This was the gaslighting I knew was coming, but hearing it, so bald-faced, so devoid of truth, still shocked me. This was them rewriting history, bending reality to fit their new narrative. This was their narcissistic supply kicking in, basking in my reflected glory, trying to claim credit for a journey they'd actively tried to derail. "No, Mark," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I don't remember that. What I remember is you telling me to get a real job and stop crying to you when it all fell apart." A beat of uncomfortable silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the distant sounds of city traffic from his end. Then, a forced chuckle. "Oh, you know me, just tough love. Gotta light a fire under you sometimes, right? Besides, you were so busy with your esoteric projects. We just wanted you to be happy and stable, you know? Like we always said, we're family. Family looks out for each other." "Family looks out for each other," I repeated, a tremor in my voice that I hoped he didn't detect. "So, what can I do for you, Mark?" I cut to the chase. There was always an ask. He launched into a convoluted story about a ground-floor opportunity in a new crypto venture, something about NFTs and metaverse real estate, all buzzwords and no substance. He needed seed funding. A small investment, he called it. Just a couple $100,000 to get things off the ground. And obviously, you'll get a huge return. Think of it as investing in family, you know? It's what we do. A couple $100,000. To him, it was pocket change. To me, it was the sum of every ramen packet, every sleepless night, every rejected pitch. It was my blood and sweat, earned while he was mocking me from his comfortable, stable life. "Mark," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "I'm not interested in investing in your ground floor opportunity. And I don't owe you anything. Not a dime. You want to pretend you always supported me? Fine. But don't expect me to play along with your delusion." The line went dead. He'd hung up on me. That was the trigger. That was the moment I realized that merely refusing wasn't enough. They needed to understand, on a visceral, undeniable level, the reality of their past actions. They needed to be confronted with the forensic dissent of their own words, their own gaslighting. It wasn't about revenge in the petty sense. It was about justice. It was about forcing them to see the truth, even if it shattered their carefully constructed self-image. This was about a technical takedown, not of a business, but of a narrative. Tone cue, grim determination. The next few weeks were a blur of meticulous, almost obsessive work. I called Sarah. Sarah was a friend from my early days, a brilliant, cynical lawyer who specialized in corporate litigation and, more importantly, had a healthy disregard for bullshit. She met me in her office, a sterile, minimalist space that mirrored her personality, sharp, efficient, and with no room for sentimentality. The scent of ozone from her industrial-grade printer and the clatter of a distant mechanical keyboard were the only sounds. The light from her floor-to-ceiling window glinted off the stacks of legal tomes, making them seem almost intimidating. "So, you want to burn your family to the ground, but legally?" Sarah asked, adjusting her severe black-rimmed glasses. Her tone was devoid of judgment, merely analytical. "I want them to understand the consequences of their actions," I corrected, my jaw tight. "I want to dismantle their fantasy. They've tried to leverage our family connection for financial gain, while simultaneously rewriting our shared history to suit their narrative. I want to show them the real history, documented, undeniable." "Digital forensics," then, she mused, tapping a pen against her notebook. "Emails, social media, archived messages. Any paper trail? Contracts? Loan agreements?" "Oh, there's a paper trail, Sarah. They've just forgotten about it, or hoped I had," I replied. This was where the forensic deep dive truly began, a journey back into the digital and physical debris of my past. My first step was my own digital archives. I spent hours, days, sifting through ancient email accounts, some dating back to the late 90s. I used specialized search operators, sifting through thousands of messages. I wasn't just looking for direct insults. I was looking for patterns of dismissal, the passive-aggressive compliments, the outright rejections. I found an email from Mark, dated 2008, when I'd first tried to launch a precursor to my current platform. He'd written, "Honestly, bro, this internet thing? It's a fad. You're pouring money into a hole. You need to invest in real assets, like property, like I advised. Maybe get a sales job. You're good at talking people into things, even if it's usually into your harebrained schemes." The metadata on the email confirmed its authenticity, the precise time, IP address, and sender details. It was undeniable. I felt a cold surge of satisfaction. This wasn't just memory, this was proof. Then there was Clara. Her weapon was more subtle, the public slight, the carefully worded denigration on social media. I pulled up archived Facebook and MySpace posts. I had to use an old, dusty laptop running an outdated OS to access some of the older platforms, its fan whirring loudly like a tiny, angry hornet. I felt like a digital archaeologist. I found a comment from Clara on a post I'd made in 2011, excitedly sharing a prototype of my platform. Her comment, "Still playing with your little website. So cute. Hope it doesn't distract you too much from looking for a real job, LOL." Followed by a string of laughing emojis. The timestamp, the public nature of the comment, it was a public declaration of contempt. Tone cue, quiet rage. Each discovery was like unearthing a piece of my own buried pain, forcing me to relive the slights, but this time with a purpose. The hardest part was recovering deleted messages. I remembered a particularly brutal exchange with Mark and Clara from a family WhatsApp group just after my second venture failed, a few years before the big success. They'd torn into me, blaming me for stressing out our parents, calling me irresponsible and a drain. I deleted the entire chat in a fit of shame and anger. But with the help of a freelance data recovery specialist Sarah knew, a quiet, bespectacled man named Leo who resembled a friendly gnome and smelled faintly of soldering fumes, we managed to recover the SQLite database file from an old phone backup. It was a painstaking process, hours of Leo's fingers flying across his keyboard in a dimly lit, gadget-filled workshop, the smell of burnt electronics hanging in the air. The file was fragmented, corrupted, but slowly, miraculously, the messages reappeared, line by painful line. "Mark, honestly, are you ever going to learn? This is just embarrassing for everyone. Clara, Mom was crying last night. You know she can't handle this kind of stress. Always about you, isn't it?" Me, a desperate, deleted reply, "I'm trying. I just need a little understanding." "Mark, understanding isn't going to pay back the loan Dad gave you. You need to get real. Clara, just give up already. It's okay to admit you're not cut out for this entrepreneur thing." Reading those messages again, recovered from the digital graveyard, was like a punch to the gut. The casual cruelty, the complete lack of empathy. But this time, instead of shame, there was a cold, pure anger. This was the blueprint of their betrayal, the evidence of their reactive abuse in response to my perceived failures. They lashed out because my struggles were inconvenient for their perfect family narrative. Sarah then turned her attention to the financial angles. Mark's luxury lifestyle consultation business, for example. He'd tried to get me to invest, and when I refused, he'd apparently turned to other family members, including our elderly aunt, trying to use the family connection to secure small, interest-free loans for his dubious ventures. He had boilerplate agreements, poorly drafted, that he'd had family sign. Sarah spotted multiple breaches of fiduciary duty, unregistered securities offerings, and blatant misrepresentation in his business plan. She pulled up public records, noting his company's abysmal financial performance, contrasting it with the rosy picture he'd painted in his investment deck. The sheer arrogance of his continued attempts to monetize family ties, even after my success, was galling. "This isn't just about showing them they were wrong about you," Sarah commented, her voice flat, as she reviewed the pile of documents. Her office hummed with the quiet efficiency of a legal machine. "This is about protecting other people from their predatory behavior, using your success as bait." She found a particularly nasty clause in a small loan agreement Mark had drawn up for our Aunt Susan, who, in her trusting nature, had signed it without legal review. It effectively gave Mark a significant percentage of Aunt Susan's small, carefully managed inheritance if his venture ever became profitable, with no clear timeline or definition of profitability. It was a blatant exploitation of family trust, a subtle but deeply insidious form of financial abuse. Aunt Susan, like our parents, had fallen into the trap of the sunk cost fallacy, continually hoping Mark would come good and make her proud, and so kept throwing good money after bad. The day of the technical takedown arrived, not in a courtroom, but in Sarah's conference room. The large, polished mahogany table reflected the sterile overhead lights, creating a cold, almost surgical atmosphere. Mark and Clara walked in, looking uncomfortable. They'd been summoned by Sarah's office under the pretense of mediating a family dispute regarding an inheritance matter, a clever ruse Sarah had devised. My parents were notably absent. Sarah had advised against involving them directly, as they were also victims of Mark's schemes, albeit willing ones. Clara, wearing a designer dress that screamed, "I'm doing well, please acknowledge it," tried to offer a conciliatory smile. "So, what's all this about my name? I heard there were some misunderstandings about Aunt Susan's will." She glanced at Mark, who stood awkwardly, hands shoved into his pockets. He still carried that air of casual superiority, even though I knew he was internally squirming. "No, Clara," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in my hands. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. This isn't about Aunt Susan's will. This is about accountability. This is about the truth. Sarah, sitting at the head of the table, slid a stack of documents across to Mark and Clara. The paper rustled with a crisp, final sound. "Mr. and Ms., their last name," she began, her voice professional, unyielding. "My client, my name, has retained me to address a pattern of financial misrepresentation, emotional distress, and potential fraud regarding several family members, yourselves included." Mark's face paled. "Fraud? What are you talking about? This is ridiculous. We're family." "That's precisely the issue," Mark, I interjected, looking him dead in the eye. "You've used that term as a shield for years, to justify your behavior, to absolve yourselves of any responsibility. But family doesn't mock. Family doesn't gaslight. And family certainly doesn't exploit." I then laid out the evidence. Sarah projected the recovered emails, the social media posts, the WhatsApp messages onto a screen. Each message, each timestamp, each snide comment, a blow to their carefully constructed facade. The fluorescent light reflected off their stunned faces. "You're pouring money into a hole. So cute. Hope it doesn't distract you from a real job, lol. Just give up already." These are just a few examples I narrated, my voice calm, almost detached. "And these are your words, not some distorted memory. This is the truth of your support." Clara started to cry, soft, performative sobs, her hands covering her face. "This is unfair. You're twisting things. We were just trying to help you." "Help me?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You know what help would have been, Clara? Acknowledgement. Belief. Anything other than derision and dismissal. Do you know how many nights I went asleep in that rotten apartment, wondering if I was insane for pursuing my dream because your voices were echoing in my head, telling me I was a failure. Then Sarah dropped the hammer. She laid out the financial documents, Mark's loan agreements with Aunt Susan, the flimsy business plan, highlighting the illegal clauses and misrepresentations. Mark exploded. You're exposing me? To Aunt Susan? And what about our parents? You do this to family? You're trying to ruin me. His face was blotchy, his voice cracking with outrage, a classic display of reactive abuse, turning himself into the victim. Ruin you, Mark? I asked, leaning forward, my voice a low, dangerous growl. You ruined yourself. You did that when you chose to exploit family trust instead of building something with integrity. You did that when you decided my success was an opportunity for you to cash in, rather than something to genuinely celebrate. The only thing I'm doing is showing you the mirror. And yes, Sarah has already advised Aunt Susan to nullify that predatory agreement and is exploring options for restitution. And no, I have not involved Mom and Dad. Yet. That's for them to reconcile with your conduct. The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unspoken accusations and crumbling illusions. The way the light hit the legal documents, gleaming off the printed words that sealed their fate, felt poetic. They stared at the evidence, at their own words, their own contracts. There was no escape. The meeting ended abruptly, with Mark storming out, Clara whimpering behind him. I stayed, sitting across from Sarah, the silence of the room now feeling expansive, not oppressive. So, Sarah said, closing her folder with a snap. Victory then. You got your truth. I looked out the window at the distant city skyline, the tiny, insignificant speck that was my office tower. Victory, I echoed, but the word felt hollow, almost bitter on my tongue. The rush of vindication was there, yes, but it was overlaid with a profound weariness. The cost of winning this war was the undeniable severance of the last vestiges of my family. I had achieved what I set out to do, to make them see, to make them accountable. But the landscape around me felt barren. The moral gray area of revenge, of asserting justice at the expense of familial bonds, was vast and cold. Was it worth it? The years of emotional suffering, the forensic deep dive into painful memories, the final, irrevocable break. I had my truth, but at what cost to my own peace? The scars were still there, just deeper now. So, Reddit, I lay it all out for you. The mockery, the gaslighting, the financial exploitation, the painstaking collection of evidence, and the final, brutal confrontation. They laughed at me when I had nothing. I stayed quiet and kept pushing forward. I didn't forget how they treated me. Now they pretend they always supported me. I forced them to confront their own lies, their own history of betrayal, their narcissistic supply severed by truth. I won. But I also lost. Tell me, was it right? Was the righteous anger, the meticulous dismantling of their false narrative, worth the absolute, undeniable destruction of family? Was this revenge or justice? Or simply a necessary, painful amputation?